science research information after graduation. I'm Ed Eckel, the engineering librarian, and I'm joined by my colleagues Carrie Leatherman, the natural sciences librarian, and Diana Sachs, the health sciences librarian, in today's workshop on finding science research information after graduation. So let me talk a little bit about what you're gonna learn. What you will learn today are basically what the information access challenges will be that you'll face when you graduate WMU. You will learn alternate strategies for finding science information. You will explore publicly accessible resources, government resources, and professional resources in the sciences. And finally, you will learn about a tool called Unpaywall that will help you find free versions of scholarly articles. Now, what are we referring to when we talk about science research information? We mean data and information that results from scholarly research. Experiments, research studies, clinical trials, and human subjects research, such as psychological studies. This type of information is usually published in peer-reviewed journal articles. However, it may also appear in conference papers, data sets, white papers, and reports. In his 1970 book, Future Shock, author Alvin Toffler referred to information as the fuel that runs the mighty accelerator of technology. I think this metaphor is still apt, particularly in the age of the internet and our having vast amounts of information at our fingertips. And it's relevant beyond just technology to fields such as health and medicine, psychology, and environmental studies. You want a high-quality fuel to run these engines. High quality and reliable information is essential for making good decisions in your future jobs, avoiding death, injury, catastrophic failures, and costly mistakes. For example, in the Boston Big Dig ceiling collapse in 2006, the bolts that were used to hold the ceiling plates in place in the Fort Port Channel tunnel were too short, and epoxy that was used to glue them in place was substandard. This mistake caused the death of a woman and injured the driver in her car, and it cost Massachusetts $54 million to repair the tunnel. Now, while you're students at Western, you have access to more and better information than probably anyone has ever had in history. The challenge you will all face, and why we designed this workshop, is that while you have this access now, much of it will disappear when you graduate. Why? Because information has value. It costs money to produce, analyze, organize, store, and make accessible to the user. Unless you are at a university or a business that pays for a subscription, you may not be able to access much of the scholarly record. Subscriptions have a cost, whether you get them on your own or have a subscription through your institution, like Western. We cannot legally provide alumni with access remotely to our online resources. And of course, not having access to this information has a big cost for you as a professional. So think of that example of the big dig in Boston. Searching for relevant scholarly information has always required one to be strategic. However, you will need to be more strategic in searching for information once you leave Western. You will move from what librarian Felix Chu called a manicured garden, a space in which information and sources have been organized and tidied up for you, to the wilderness. The wilderness can be rich and beautiful and very valuable, but it can also be frustrating, disorganized, and chaotic, maybe even a little dangerous. You will have to become more nonlinear in your searching, more strategic, and pursue alternate sources. So it will help to have some knowledge of the free scholarly information resources that are available to you on the internet. You will also need to be more critical of the information you find, since there is also a lot of poor quality, biased information on the internet. These are the skills we would like you to practice today. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Carrie.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So now that we've set the stage that after graduation, if we can use the metaphor, you'll be moving from a tidy garden to a very verdant yet overgrown and lush wilderness of information sources. Let's talk about what you can do, where you can find access to some of these information sources. One of the first ideas I'd like to put out there is the idea of public information sources and publicly funded information sources. As Ed was saying a few minutes ago in his slides, he mentioned that information has value, and that includes monetary value. For a while, a lot of the products of federally funded research in science, health, technology, and those products being scholarly research articles, were mainly available only through published scholarly journals that cost money to subscribe to. And either you could access those individually or as groups of journals through online article databases. And many of you have probably used article databases at your stay here at WMU. What you may not know, though, is that these article databases, commercial article databases, are really expensive. So the idea that you would be able to afford to subscribe to these once you're out of college, or a member of the public could subscribe to these article databases, is not realistic. So where does that leave the public? Where does that leave you as an upcoming alum to access this kind of information? This is a sort of question that people really started asking maybe about 20 years ago or so in earnest. This idea that there was a growing awareness that publicly funded research would not be available to the public freely was problematic. So right in the mid 2000s, the 20 teens, there were several pieces of legislation, including the Federal Research Public Awareness Act, the Fair Access to Science and Technology Research Act, came along, trying to make allowances for people to be able to access publicly funded research information freely. Also specifically in 2013, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy mandated that federal agencies with large budgets, like over $100 million, for research and development, make these publications freely accessible to people. So now, currently, there are many agencies, federal agencies, ranging from like the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Food and Drug Administration, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, National Science Foundation. They now have their research products, oftentimes research articles, reports, that sort of thing, freely available. With a catch. Many agencies, bowing to the financial realities of commercial databases, still wanting to be able to make money and survive based on making research available to scholars and students and others. Many of these government agencies have an embargo on research articles and other products of research. What embargo means in this situation is that the public agencies will not make the research products, articles, reports freely available only until after a certain amount of time has passed after the publication of an article. Many agencies, it's 12 months max. Generally, it ranges from maybe 6 months to 12 months. And basically what that means is anything published, say, within that embargo period, say 12 months, you will not find in the freely available databases, websites of these government agencies. You would only find it in commercially available sources like a subscription journal or a commercial database that you would have to pay a subscription for. Okay. So, having said that, there are some sources out there, government article databases, government agency websites where these research products, are freely available. How do you find them? Well, I'm glad you asked. We actually at the library put together a page of links to a lot of these different sources. And yes, I see we have that up there. I will go ahead and, if I can, or perhaps Diana or Ed, you could drop the link, thank you. In the chat, you'll see the link to this guide called Services for Alumni. There's a particular tab on this guide called Science Research Information. And if you could pull that up, whoever's manning the slides, could you actually show that live guide for a minute? Thank you. Oh, you did. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm looking at two different screens. So this guide lists a lot of different federal agencies, either that have an article database that is free and available to the public. There are also some websites listed on there where agencies, through their own website, will have a page that has a search engine or has some kind of an index or list of different research products like reports, articles, what have you. On our guide, we've got them lumped into about 3 groups based on topic, kind of the discipline area, either natural sciences, health, engineering, technology. This page is something that will be freely available to you after you graduate. It's available to you now. It's available to anybody in the public. We want to make these links really emphasized and available to people. That's why we've curated this guide. Okay. Now that we've shown you this, gave you a little preview of things to come here, what I'd like us all to do is actually do an activity where you have a chance to actually take a look at some of these resources up close. And we're going to do kind of a group effort here and plug a lot of the information we find into a Google document. So everybody can view the information everybody's finding, and we can all kind of learn and benefit from each other's activities here. So please go ahead and do this. Look at the live guide, whose link was in the chat. Find a government organization that you're interested in, something that's probably related to the discipline that you're studying, and then go ahead and enter that information into the spreadsheet. And it'll include, say, your name, the discipline or profession that you're interested in, and then the government agency and their link to the information that they have available. Let's take maybe 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and have everybody just do that, and then we'll go on from there. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We're glad to respond to that.
And it'd be great if you found something that we don't have on that guide. If there's something that's missing that's important,
Yes.
we'd love to hear it.
Yes, I did. I thank you, Ed. I didn't mention that. Feel free to just do some searching too. If you have a government agency or a topic that you're especially interested in, or discipline, I should say, try looking it up. Try just doing a Google search, see what you can find, and we'd be glad to know about it. We'll add it to the guide.
I see 3 of you have accessed the shared Google Sheet. If you're having trouble accessing it, feel free to unmute yourself or just write in chat that you're having trouble and we can troubleshoot that for you.
Yeah. Good deal. Thank you, Diana. Okay. It looks like people are putting some information in there. We have an interesting variety of topics people are interested in.
I'm just going to make a few quick comments, if I may.
Mm.
I think I agree. Some really interesting resources that you all are finding. One of the challenges is that some resources will not be available once you graduate for the reasons that Ed explained earlier, that they are contained within academic, or they are contained within subscription databases, which you need to pay to access. So for example, the IET research, the Institution of Engineering and Technology Research, those are wonderful journals, really excellent journals, but a significant amount of material in those journals may require a subscription to access. And while you're at WMU, you have access to many of those journals, but you may not have as easy access once you graduate. Another one I'll mention for the child welfare materials for social work, one of the organizations that we linked to on the resource guide was the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they are one of the government agencies that Carrie was speaking about, which make public all of the research that has been produced either as part of the CDC or by independent researchers, but who received some funding from the CDC. So they have a whole section on their site on child abuse and neglect resources, which includes various reports produced by CDC researchers, but also academic journal publications that, again, were either produced by the CDC or that were produced by people who received funding. So this is all research that will be available to anybody because public funds went into producing the research.
Yeah, good points, Diana. Thank you. One thing I'd like to mention too, again, the idea of what's going to be available to you once you graduate. Even now, you may be able to do a Google Scholar search or even a Google search and find links to research articles, links to research reports, what have you. But you may not be able to find the full text, and this is especially important after you graduate. Right now, WMU Libraries participates in a effort that Google Scholar has to link up our holdings, our library holdings, to a Google Scholar search. There's ways you can do this in your Google searches, where that basically is kind of a shortcut to our holdings. So if you find something in Google Scholar, it gives you a link to the full text that we as the library actually own or subscribe to. Once you graduate, though, that goes away. So these wonderful Google Scholar searches that you're doing where you get a ton of hits, it might not be to the full text. In fact, oftentimes it's not. A lot of commercial databases, journals, make their table of contents freely available to Google Scholars. So their materials are indexed in Google Scholar, but the rest of the article is not in Google Scholar. It's not something that you can access. So these sources where you can have the whole kit and caboodle, the whole article available to you through these freely available government databases and websites become all the more important. So just something to make note of. Okay. Okay. And just looking back at the activity we're doing, it looks like people found some really good stuff. Anybody want a couple more minutes for that activity or have any questions about, what you were looking for, what you found? Okay, let's do this then. Why don't we go ahead? I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Diana. She is going to talk a little bit about open access and this wonderful thing called Unpaywall. Take it away, Diana.
Thanks. Let me start sharing my screen. And let me also just open chat. So if anybody has any questions, I can still see that. I can have chat open, but when I start sharing my screen, it closes chat. So I have to reopen it. So are you all seeing this screen where it says open access? So yes, Carrie spoke briefly just now about the idea that a lot of the materials that we can access through a general search, whether that's through a library's catalog or databases or through Google Scholar, a lot of what we find is available is the title, the table of contents, sometimes the abstract of an article, but not necessarily the full text. When you're on campus at WMU and you're a student at WMU, you can actually connect your Google Scholar account, or if you're using library resources already, then you're connected, and you'll be recognized as a subscriber to many of these resources, and you will be able to seamlessly access the full text. But if you're off campus and are no longer a student, you will not get that seamless access. Instead, you'll have an option where it will tell you, would you like to pay $49.99 to access this article? Or you must log in using your credentials, and then you'll try to log in, but it won't recognize you because you're not a recognized user. So this is something that happens regularly. There are a couple of ways to work around that. Now, Carrie's already talked about the government websites, which by law make available much of the research that is produced either by those government agencies or by researchers who have been funded by those government agencies. However, there's been a growing movement among researchers in general, not just government researchers, to make their information, to make their research publicly available. This is something researchers want to share their work. They want other people to be able to learn from the work that they have done. So many researchers are choosing to publish in what are called open access journals. These are journals which they often operate on a different kind of a revenue stream than the traditional subscription model. Sometimes this means that the researchers actually pay to have their material included in these publications, these open access publications, and therefore made available to everybody. Sometimes an open access journal might be sponsored by an institution, usually like a university, so that for example, at WMU, we have a few journals that we sponsor. One example is the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy. And that is one that is published through the WMU Library's institutional repository. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a moment. But it's published through the WMU Library's institutional repository. And that journal is it's a legitimate peer-reviewed academic journal. It publishes academic research in the field of occupational therapy, but it is open. It is open to everybody with an internet connection. And the editorial functions and the publishing functions are paid for through WMU and WMU's partners in that journal. So that these open access journals, can be a great option for your own research once you are no longer affiliated with WMU as an active student. The one thing that I will draw your attention to on the resource guide, I'm going to jump back up here. We actually have a tab on this resource guide which says where to find open access or OA materials. The first thing on this page is Unpaywall. And I'm going to come back to Unpaywall in a moment, and I'll show you how that works. But next we have this section on open access. These are all repositories of open access journals and open access research. Some of them are are large repositories like Creative Commons or Open Data Soft. Some of them are specifically for journal articles, like the Directory of Open Access Journals, or again, Open Access Journals at WMU. So like the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy that I mentioned earlier, which is produced by WMU, or hosted at least by WMU, would be in that list. And the Directory of Open Access Journals will include the journals that WMU has, but also the open access journals from other institutions. There are also some for different institutions, again, like we have for WMU, for Harvard, for University of Michigan, for the University of California system. There are many others. These are just some examples. And then there are open access repositories by subject area. So these are repositories of open access journals that focus in a particular subject or particular discipline. Now, again, most of these are also contained within this large directory of open access journals, or DOAJ. That's why I often, when I'm doing my research, I just go directly to DOAJ, because that resource contains all of these different subject areas. But if you'd like to focus your research, these are great resources as well. Now, I mentioned this institutional level. Academic institutional repositories have open access to scholarship through preprints. This is where legality comes into play. When we talk about an institutional repository, these are usually affiliated with specific universities or colleges like WMU, and the institution will have their own institutional repository. When a researcher at WMU publishes a journal article in whatever journal is appropriate for their field, many of those journals have a very strict copyright restriction, which says that only people who have subscriptions can access the article. However, they will often allow the individual researcher to make what's called a preprint version of the article available through their own institutional repository. So researchers at WMU can post the preprint version, the unformatted version of their research article in WMU's institutional repository. A researcher at University of Michigan can post the preprint or unformatted version of their research article in University of Michigan's institutional repository. So it's not in everybody's institutional repositories. It's only in the institutional repository for the institution where that particular researcher currently works or has worked in the past. So what that means, though, is you would theoretically have to search these institutional repositories for every university in the world. And that's a little ridiculous. And that is where Unpaywall comes into play. Unpaywall is a browser extension. This is, and it's available for both the Google Chrome browser and the Firefox browser. At this point, it's only available for those two web browsers, not for others. But what it lets you do is it's just something that you can always have running in your browser, and it will automatically search for freely and legally available versions of an article, so that if you come across an article that requires a subscription to access, the Unpaywall browser extension will look for a free and legal version to give you as an alternative. So let me show you some examples. First of all, this is the main website for Unpaywall. there's not a lot on it, as you can see. It's mostly just this picture of the starry universe. But there's a link on the side here that says get the extension. If you click that get the extension and you're in Firefox or you're in the Chrome browser, it will let you download the extension for Firefox or for Chrome. Once you have Unpaywall, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is a Google Scholar search that I did because Google Scholar is freely available to everybody. I just did a search for health and yoga and exercise. Now, if I look at the second item here, this randomized control trial of yoga and exercise in multiple sclerosis, this is from the journal Neurology. If I click on that link, or even you'll see that it has a link here to PDF on the side. When I click on PDF, nothing happens. I don't actually get a PDF. When I click on the link, I actually have it already open here. I can see the title, the authors, all that citation information. I can see the abstract. But when I go to click the link that says view full text of this article, it tells me I have to log in. So in this case, what I'm looking for is, can Unpaywall give me a link to a free legal version of this article so that I don't have to spend this $39 to access this article? On the right-hand side in my browser, I know it's kind of small here. There's a little padlock in gray here on the side of my browser. This is the Unpaywall link. And if I click that link, it tells me that Unpaywall extension couldn't find any legal open access version of this journal article. So this particular article is not available in a free legal version. But back on the same search page, let's look at the first one here now, the health benefits of yoga and exercise, a review of comparison studies from the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. So again, I have this open here. So same situation, I've got all the citation information, I've got the abstract. This time when I click view article and I go to view full text, it says again that I have to log in or that I have to pay $51. But this time the Unpaywall extension on the right is an open padlock in the field of green. So if I click that open padlock, it automatically downloaded or took me to the whole article. So now I have access to the full article right there on my screen. So Unpaywall can't unlock things that are not already available somewhere, but it will find those things for you if they exist in a free and legal format. So again, I definitely recommend that you get the browser extension for Unpaywall, and it will just sort of sit there in the background. But if you ever are looking for something or you're looking for journal articles, look to see if it has the little padlock and if the padlock is open or closed on the side. It'll just run there in the background. You don't even really notice it most of the time. So that is Unpaywall, which is a great tool for maintaining, for making sure that you can continue to have access as easily as possible to research that's in your field. The next thing to think about is, because some information just requires a subscription, like that article that we were looking at from the Neurology Journal. That one, Unpaywall could not find an open access version or a freely available legal version of that article. So the next thing to think about is using your institutions. Most public university libraries, like WMU, are open to members of the public to visit. Not right now because of COVID and the pandemic, but normally WMU library and most other public university libraries also, anybody can just walk into the library and use their computers to access their databases. There are, and I actually did a quick informal poll of colleagues at other public universities and in Michigan. I talked to librarians at Oakland, Ferris, Grand Valley, Michigan State, University of Michigan, Washtenaw State, Saginaw State. I think there's another. Central. I talked to librarians at all of these other libraries just to confirm, and they all offer that same service where any member of the public can just walk into their library when there's not a global pandemic going on and use their resources. So while you do lose the remote access when you graduate to the public university libraries databases, you can still go to the public university library and use their databases. And then you can say, you can just download the articles you want and read them at home, or you can print them off and read them. So that's always a great option for you. Public libraries, your local town or city public library is also a great resource. They often also have databases of journal articles, which we don't always think about public libraries as having access to academic journal articles, but many of them do, although they typically don't have as in-depth coverage as a university library with a more focused research effort. Now, some public libraries will also fill interlibrary loan requests for journal articles with their patrons. So again, if you are doing your Google search and you did your Google search and you found this article from Neurology and you want this article and Unpaywall isn't working for you, you can always contact your local public library and see if they can do an interlibrary loan request and order an electronic copy of this article for you from another library. And usually they would reach out to a university library like WMU and have WMU or another university library that does subscribe send them an email with that article contained within it. And then they would just email that to you, the patron. Now, not every public library can do that interlibrary loan service, though, for journal articles. So it's worth checking with your local public library as to whether or not that is a service that they provide. It does seem to be, this is an extremely unscientific poll, but I spoke with colleagues across the country, and it seemed like it was often grouped by state. So like most of the public librarians I talked to who were in Minnesota and Massachusetts said that they provide interlibrary loan for journal articles, but most of the public librarians here in Michigan actually cannot do interlibrary loan for journal articles. They would instead recommend that you go to a public university library like WMU. So it really depends on where you happen to be living and working. The next thing to think about is whether your employer has access to some of these journal subscriptions. Typically, smaller employers cannot afford these subscriptions, but many large employers will. For example, I have a friend who works at the Boeing corporate library. The airplane manufacturers, they have their own library and librarians just for the company. And so because they're a large institution, so they have access to many of these research databases, and they make those available to their employees. But a smaller company would probably not be able to afford access. So it's worth checking to see if you are working for an employer that can give you access to the databases. Similarly, most hospitals, either mid or large size hospitals, like Bronson and Burgess, for example, both have publicly accessible libraries. Now, their employees, usually their physicians and other clinicians, have remote access to their databases. But any member of the public, again, during non-pandemic times, any member of the public can just walk into the hospital library at Bronson or at Borges and use the computers there to access the databases that they have. Now, being hospital libraries, their database subscriptions are focused on health information. So you're not going to find access to much, say, engineering information in those those libraries. It all just depends on the focus of the institution. The last place to consider is professional organizations. Many professional organizations offer access to online journal subscriptions as a feature of membership. For example, the American Occupational Therapy Association gives all of its members online access to the journals that they publish. Not to every occupational therapy journal that exists, only to the ones that are published by the AOTA, but it is definitely a perk of membership. So if you are considering joining a professional organization in your field, consider one thing to consider as to whether or not it's worth it for you financially to pay that membership fee is, do they give you access to the research? So with that being said, I'm going to show you very quickly the Kalamazoo Public Library's website. So if any of you have ever been to KPL before, you may have seen this website. If you are, I'm just going to use this as an example of how you can navigate your local public library wherever you happen to be living. And you can see what are the resources that they have available. So Kalamazoo is a mid-sized public library system. It's nowhere near as big as like Los Angeles Public Library or Boston Public Library, but it's a solid public library system. It's big, certainly bigger than many small towns that we have here in Michigan. So just to give you a sense of it, it's sort of a medium. So if we are on the kpl.gov, Kalamazoo Public Library's main website, their main webpage, they have all of the different resources that you would normally use at a public library, but they have a link here to databases. And databases means the same thing for KPL as it does for WMU. These are the reliable online collections of journal articles and other kinds of materials that you can use for specialized research. So if we scroll down into the alphabetical list here, the first one is Academic Search Complete. And this is a leading resource for scholarly research. It supports high-level research in the key areas of academic study by providing journals, periodicals, reports, books, and more. So this is a database that KPL subscribes to that contains academic research information. So if you live in Kalamazoo and you have a Kalamazoo Public Library card, which everybody who lives in Kalamazoo is allowed to get, then you will have access to all of their databases. So what I'd like you to do right now is we're going to go back to our activity sheet. So again, I'll put the link back in. The chat. So I'm going to have you go back to our activity worksheet. And this time, I'm going to ask you all to fill out column D. I want you to pick a location that's not Kalamazoo, because I just showed you Kalamazoo Public Library's website. So it could be a city or town where you currently live or work, or where you think you might like to live or work in the future, just not Kalamazoo. And see if you can find the public library website or a nearby public university library website. So if you are going to be living in Lansing, for example, you could put Michigan State University's library's website. But see if you can find a library website for a place where you either would like to live or work or currently live or work. It'll just take like 2 minutes or so to, well, give you maybe 4 or 5 minutes. How about that? So you can see if you can find find a library that you could use as a resource in the future. Well, you can certainly all continue to explore the resources available in whichever city or town or country even that you decide that you are going to end up living in. Wherever you go, I just strongly recommend that you get a local public library card. One more thing I'll point out on the Kalamazoo Public Library as an example, you just click on help. When you go to help, you can see their phone number, or you can access all of the different ways that you can get help. You can contact them. Down at the bottom, if you click contact, you can contact a particular branch of the Kalamazoo Public Library to ask a question, or if you want to talk to the director, so on. So there's all different kinds of ways that you could contact the library based on what type of question you have. But it is literally our job as librarians to answer questions. So please don't ever feel like you are being a bother or something when it comes to asking your public librarian for help with whatever your research needs might be. And I point that out because I hear that from people fairly often. I hear people say, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but it's my job to have you ask me questions." So I hope that you will feel comfortable doing that. So again, I'm putting this link one more time to our resource guide for alumni so that you all can refer back to that in the future. Remember that on this guide, we have information about how you can access material and get help from WMU libraries. We have the information about finding open access information, open access research information. We have the section specifically on science research information and some more ways that you can get help. Just because you graduate from WMU does not mean that you lose the ability to talk to us and get advice and help from us with your research. We all will continue to be resources for you, Ed, Carrie, and myself, but also all of our colleagues at WMU libraries. So we do have a quick little survey that we'd love to get your feedback on this workshop. I'm going to pop that into chat. So please take a minute and complete that quick survey. It's only a few questions long, but it gives us a lot of information about what worked in this workshop and what questions you might still have so that we can improve workshops like this in the future. And all of our contact information, again, I'm going to put all this into chat. Oop, I'm going to put all, I can get it. All right, I will put all that into chat so that you can review, you can always contact us at any time if you have questions in the future. Feel free to just sort of bookmark our contact information for after you graduate, or for right now for that matter. So for now, I'm going to open it up. Any questions that any of you have for right now about accessing material once you are no longer a student at WMU? Any questions? Well, like I said, if you have questions in the future, you now know how to contact us, so feel free. And again, please do fill out that little survey that we have for the feedback survey. We really appreciate getting your feedback. So I'm going to stop the recording